Hi there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is. As always, happy whatever day it is you're watching this. Welcome to Left Side of the Aisle. And me, Larry Erickson, I'm your host. And for the next, close to half an hour, I'm going to be rattling on about some things that I think are worthy of your attention. If you have any reactions to the show, you can feel free to email them to me directly. My personal email is whoviating, WHOVIATING @AOL.com. Or if you didn't catch that, you can go to my website. It's called Lotus Surviving a Dark Time, and the URL will be here a couple of times during the show. And you can get the email address from there if you'd like, if you didn't catch it, or you can leave a comment there if you'd rather. The one thing, if you do send me email, two requests, as always, include something in the subject line that makes it clear this is about the show, that it's not spam, and two, be a little patient about getting an answer, because I tend to be very slow about answering my email, but you will get one. All right, with that, I always like to start with some good news where I can, and I've got some good news now on a relatively unexpected front: guns. The Attorney General of Massachusetts, her name is Maura Healey, she has opened a second front in her efforts to bring some additional gun controls to her state. In July, she moved to bar the sale of guns that had been very slightly altered by, well, for example, leaving off a flash suppressor, something minor like that, in order to evade the state's ban on assault-type weapons. That ban includes a ban on so-called duplicate weapons, duplicate versions of common weapons such as the AR-15. And this new move in July made it clear that duplicate includes guns that have internal operating systems that are essentially the same as the banned weapons, or that have key functional components that are interchangeable with the banned weapons. In other words, it's much like if M&Ms were illegal, you couldn't issue new ones without the M printed on the shell and say, oh, well, these are legal. This move against these duplicate weapons, she acknowledged, this is a small step, especially since most gun violence still arises out of handguns, but it was a step. Now she's, again, opened a second front. She's begun an investigation of certain gun manufacturers based on Massachusetts's rather extensive consumer protection laws. And we know about this investigation because two of the gun manufacturers, Remington and Glock, have sued in court to try to stop her from investigating. Now, among Healey's charges in here are that the weapons are prone to accidental discharges. And in fact, Remington recently had a recall of two types of rifles that it issued between 2006 and 2014 for precisely that reason. Now, the Glock, for its part, and one of the reasons this is important because the Glock, of course, is a handgun. The Glock is notoriously easy to fire with just relatively little pressure from your trigger finger, and it has a trigger safety mechanism that critics say doesn't actually work as it should. What that means is that the gun going off when you didn't intend it to or wanted to is actually notoriously easy. And indeed, in Healey's response to Glock's lawsuit, she cited several such cases, including one where a man's Glock went off in his pocket while he was dancing. Now, the Glock company's response to the claim that the handgun is too easy to fire unintentionally is that with proper training and careful technique, accidental discharges can be avoided, which to me translates to guilty as charged. As a bit of a sidebar, Glock claimed in its court filings that Healey's true purpose was to make political headlines, which, when you consider the fact that the reason we know about the investigation is because Remington and Glock sued to stop it, is actually kind of funny. Now, Healey is looking for a rather broad range of documentation from these companies relating to consumer safety issues such as consumer complaints, accidental discharges, past lawsuits, legal settlements, product recalls, and so on. And Remington and Glock may not be the only gun manufacturers that are included in the call for documents, because in her official response, her office's response rather, to Glock's suit, it was said that both those companies are, quote, part of a larger series of similar gun safety investigations, which actually makes the good news even better. And that actually, unfortunately, leads us with a rather big sigh to one of our regular features, the Clown Award, given as always for meritorious stupidity. Now, there's often a great deal of stupidity revolving around the issue of guns, a lot of that stupidity revolving around some variation of my cold dead fingers, or they're coming to take my guns away, ha-ha, spoken in the voice of Napoleon XIV. And if you don't get that last reference, ask your parents, they will. But in this case, the clowning is judicial clowning. And so this week's winner of the Big Red Nose is the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. See, on August 31st, the court ruled that Rowan Wilson, this is a woman living in rural Nevada, was properly and correctly denied the ability to purchase a gun because she is an unlawful user of a controlled substance. And just what is the controlled substance of which she is an unlawful user? Medical marijuana. Medical marijuana, which is legal in Nevada. But the feds don't care about that fact because the feds continue to refuse to recognize the usefulness or validity of medical marijuana anywhere, anytime, anyhow. So the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, the ATF, had recently sent a letter to gun shop owners which said anyone who uses marijuana as a medicine, even if it's legal where they are, is still an unlawful user of a controlled substance and is therefore forbidden to buy or possess guns under federal law. Wilson sued, she lost in lower court, and now the Ninth Circuit Court has upheld that lower court decision. Why? How? The Circuit Court admitted that this does, in the court's own words, directly burden her core Second Amendment right to possess a firearm, but insisted that the burden is not severe enough to override the law because, well, and this court actually said this, she could have bought the gun before registering for medical marijuana, which is inane on its face because under the law she's also a felon if she possesses a gun. Or they said she could just give up her medical marijuana card. And if it takes you more than a second to figure out what's wrong with that choice, then you're an even bigger clown than the court is. All right, all that's dumb enough, but wait. Because having said that, the court found that the only remaining legal question was whether a rule preventing people like Wilson from buying guns is a reasonable way of accomplishing the goal of reducing gun violence. And this is where it really goes off the rails, because in attempting to force an answer to that question of yes, that denying medical marijuana patients the option of owning a gun actually helps the goal of reducing gun violence, the court relied on antiquated and long disproved claims to assert that there is, quote, a strong link between drug use and violence, unquote. Now, the government claimed exactly that link in its brief, but it did it without providing any backup examples or citations. But the court ruled that, and I'm quoting, studies and surveys relied on in similar cases suggest a significant link between drug use, including marijuana, and violence. And in case you don't notice what just happened, the government made an unsubstantiated claim, and the court set about proving it for them. What's more, not only does the court throw all drugs into one pile, as if LSD, marijuana, methamphetamines, barbiturates, and heroin, or as to use the terms from my youth, acid, grass, speed, downers, and smack, were all the same, with all the same effects. Not only did the court do that, it went out of its way to specify that, yes, it did mean that marijuana leads to irrational or unpredictable behavior and is connected to violence. Now, this is so far removed from current pharmacological knowledge, which in fact has repeatedly shown that marijuana is more likely to reduce violent crime than to increase it. It is so far removed from current knowledge as to be an embarrassment to the law and the court. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals has issued a number of landmark rulings in the past, but on this occasion, the judges have refused to challenge if they have not, in fact, completely bought into the miserable failure of the war on drugs and the fantasies that drive it, at least with regard to marijuana. And in so doing, they have turned themselves into clowns. All right, next up. I have an update on something that I talked about on my last show 2 weeks ago. At that time, I brought the good news about the decision of the Department of Justice to phase out the use of private prisons in the federal prison system. However, I also brought the not good news that this did not apply to the Department for the Protection of the Fatherland, because it and the DOJ are separate government departments. And it's Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE or ICE, which I still think is a remarkably appropriate acronym. It is ICE, which is part of the Department for the Protection of the Fatherland, which oversees the nation's network of immigrant detention centers, which means that the change about prisons did not apply to them. Now, however, the news is, the update is, the Obama administration is considering an end to the practice of keeping immigrant detainees in these for-profit prisons. Now, again, they call them immigrant detention centers, but I call them prisons because I still say that, hey, if you can't leave, it's prison. Now, Jed Johnson, he is the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, has ordered a review of ways to end the use of those private prisons to hold immigrants. A decision is supposed to be made by the end of November. Grassroots Leadership, an advocacy group, estimates that about half of the federal spending on these prisons, about $1 billion a year, goes to private companies capitalizing on the desperation of immigrants and refugees, even as those private prisons have displayed a pattern of poor medical care and abuse, which has been documented by civil rights organizations. A pattern that, in fact, is the direct result of these prisons having an incentive to cut costs to increase their profits. Now, the federally run facilities are not without similar problems, but Bob LaBall, executive director of Grassroots Leadership, says that the problems in the private prisons are magnified. So a favorable decision by Jed Johnson would be a major victory for civil rights and immigrants advocacy groups, and it's much to be hoped for. But immigration officials have actually pushed back against this idea, saying it would cost taxpayers billions of dollars more a year, would take more than a decade to implement, and could well make things worse. Put another way, they're offering typical, this is the best of all possible worlds, don't rock the boat, bureaucratic BS. But now, admittedly, getting out of the private prison business for immigrants would be an undertaking. 9 of the 10 countries' largest, 9 of the 10 largest immigrant prisons in the United States are operated by private companies, and together they hold about 2/3 of the detainees in a system that typically has about 31,000 people in custody on any given day. But officials, too comfortable with the status quo, are now resorting to what approach doomsday scenarios, where cutting down on private prisons would bring ruin not to the system, not to those prisons, but to the immigrants. Why, they'd have to stuff them into state and local jails where conditions may be even worse. And besides that, it would mean putting people who have not been accused of a crime into facilities where they are in contact with potentially dangerous criminals. Well, I can actually think of 2 answers to that right off the top of my head. One is that if people have not been accused of a crime, maybe at least for a good number of them, it wouldn't be necessary to lock them up at all. Especially if, as advocacy groups argue, the government could allow more community organizations to vouch for immigrants and work with courts to ensure that people get to their legal proceedings. And we will get to the second answer right after the break. And we're back, and we're talking about how to deal with the immigrants now in private prison if we're not going to use them anymore to imprison immigrants. And one answer, again, is to simply imprison fewer people. Here's another. If the issue is that in order to stop using private prisons, the feds would have to build entirely new ones to replace them, which I assume is where the "it will take more than 10 years to do" notion comes from, how about we forget about building new ones and just take those existing private prisons and seize them by eminent domain? I mean, after all, why not? Now, the Fifth Amendment says, and I'm quoting here, "Nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation." But courts right up to the Supremos have held that the phrase public use doesn't actually mean for use by the public. It means public purpose, or even more broadly, public benefit. So that, for example, seizing people's houses to turn the land over to a private developer in the hope that some project, if it works out, will increase local tax revenue is just fine under the Constitution. In fact, the concept of eminent domain has been distorted and twisted so far that even private corporations are now invoking it in pursuit of their own profit. So why not just take the private prisons? Certainly, it would meet the criteria. I mean, it would advance the public purpose of helping to end the use of private prisons, and it would bring a public benefit in that, while the owners obviously would have to be compensated, the cost of doing that would surely be less than the cost of building entirely new facilities, so you'd save the public money. Now, the fact that I'm quite sure that ID has never even been broached, and in fact, if somebody did, they probably got fired, it's just one more indication of what's wrong in our society and our governing affairs, and how the interests of corporations still drive too much of our national policy, and more importantly, our national psychology, to the point we're questioning them for anything short of the most outright egregious criminality usually doesn't even enter the conversation. Still, despite all that, the fact that the idea of putting an end to private prisons in the immigration service, the fact that this idea is even being questioned, that putting an end to these prisons is even being considered, that's actually hopeful news, that question is even being asked. But don't shed any private tears for the private prison industry just yet, though. Even if the federal government completely ended its use of private prisons, the industry could still thrive because most inmates in this country are not held in federal centers. They're held in state and local prisons and jails, and a lot of them are run by private companies. In fact, Damon Hinniger, he's the chief executive of Corrections Corporation of America, the original and largest private prison company in the country, told investors in June that his firm will be just fine no matter who wins the White House. On the other hand, in August, the California legislature passed the Dignity Not Detention Act, which would block local governments in the state from contracting with private companies to run immigrant detention centers there. Now, the bill went to Governor Jerry Brown's desk, but as of September 7th, when I was preparing this show, he still had not signed it. Hopefully that will have changed by the time you see this. The funny thing is, I can easily remember a time when the idea of private prisons would have seemed, in fact, did seem utterly bizarre, utterly far-fetched, totally out of keeping with how we would think of ourselves as a people. But actually, instead, as it turned out, they were just another outgrowth of the war on drugs, when the exploding prison population that produced overcrowding and rising costs in its wake. And of course, this was during the 80s, a time when the phrase private enterprise was spoken with the same reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts. And until it came to the point where we regarded private prisons as so normal, so much a part of our broken criminal injustice system, that we dared not undo them. Happily, it appears that hand has finally been played out, and the tide of opinion, of knowledge about these prisons is turning for the better. Let's hope that continues. All right, on another topic, I have on a number of occasions described the U.S. public as being uninformed, malinformed, and misinformed by our major news media. Part of that malformation is the choices in what drives coverage. Some years ago, a cousin wrote to me saying that it didn't matter what the news media said because she said, I think what I think, not what the media tells me to think. And I responded that that's true. The media can't really tell you what to think. And it doesn't really control what you think, but it does have a major influence over what you think about, over what is and isn't important. And control of the agenda in that way often is controlling of the outcome. It's with that in mind that I bring up this story. A 24-year-old anti-government 9/11 truther named Bryce Queller has been arrested and charged with making terrorist threats in a video that was posted on YouTube. In the 15-minute clip, Queller showed off 2 rifles, an AR-15 type and a sniper rifle, and was wearing a military-style flak jacket and night vision goggles. In the video, he says that he's tired of the government trying to take away his First and Second Amendment rights, that he cannot wait to use his guns, quote, as the founding fathers intended, unquote, and that he wants to kill, again quoting, gays, faggots, lesbians, and Satanists, and he claims to be a Christian warrior. Queller also says that he is tired of America and intends to begin killing soon. Okay, here's the question. Outside of Las Vegas, which is where Queller lived before he was arrested, the only major news outlet coverage I could find about this, over 2 news aggregators I checked, was the New York Daily News and the Daily Mail, which is published in Britain. What do you think the coverage would have been if everything else, every word, the dress, the guns, everything exactly the same, but instead of being Bryce Queller, he was, I don't know, Ahmed Muhammad. And instead of calling himself a Christian warrior, he called himself a warrior for Allah. What do you think would have been the coverage then? Do you think this would have gone down the memory hole? Do you think this would have been ignored coast to coast? But oh no, we're not supposed to be afraid of right-wing terrorism. Oh no. We aren't supposed to be afraid of the domestic fascist terrorist. We aren't supposed to be afraid of the people who live their lives in fantasies of the moon landing being a hoax staged by the Illuminati, and no, I am not kidding. We're not supposed to be afraid of the people who dream of using their AK-47s and AR-15s as the founding fathers intended. We aren't supposed to be afraid of those for who Orlando was a cause for celebration, not mourning. No, we're supposed to spend all of our time and all of our energy as being afraid of anything that could be labeled radical Islam, because that's the agenda being pushed by the state. That's the agenda that most serves the interest of the powerful. So that is the agenda that gets pushed by our mass media, which is long since chosen the role of stenographer for the powerful over the far nobler one, as the character E.K. Hornbeck put it in the play Inherit the Wind, in a slight misquote from Mr. Dooley, the nobler cause of comforting the afflicted and afflicting the comfortable. But after all, why should we be concerned with one lone wacko, which is somehow what they always are when they're from the right wing? They're just one lone wacko. Well, how about because of the fact that as of Thursday morning, Bryce Queller's YouTube page had 162,141 subscribers. A wacko he is, lone he is not. Instead, he is emblematic of what has become known as the alt-right, a term which has become to greater prominence now that Hillary Clinton has accused Donald the Rump of enabling it. And by the way, a detour here, okay? I've been wondering about those people who write or act like the expression alt-right is something new or original. Is our institutional memory that short, or is all our political commentary being written by millennials? So a brief history for those in need of one. Back in the Stone Age of the Internet, like say the early 1990s, when you would still routinely go to an FTP site to download a file, Gopher accessed one of the biggest parts of the Internet, and Mosaic was really hot stuff. There was these things called news groups, which were crossed between the even older BBS's, bulletin board systems, and discussion groups. And actually, there still are news groups, but back in the day, they were enormously popular to the point of being ubiquitous. At one point, there were over 110,000 of them. News groups were, or are, frankly, organized into hierarchies, where topics are layered from the most general to the most specific, and you go down and down and down until you're at the level where you want to make your comment. And by the way, did you know that Yahoo supposedly originally stood for yet another hierarchically organized oracle? Now, one of those hierarchies was the alt hierarchy, with alt being short for alternative. It was originally for topics that the administrators of the newsgroup system did not want to allow. But once it was established, it wound up very quickly being for whatever sorts of topics wouldn't comfortably fit anywhere else. I don't specifically remember if there was an alt-right news group somewhere down in the alt hierarchy, but I know for sure that there were alt-left ones because I was in a couple of them. All right, but getting back to the subject at hand, alt-right, as the term is used today, does not refer to a news group, but rather to what I will be sufficiently polite to call a philosophy, even though mental derangement would be far more accurate. A philosophy that celebrates what is basest, most destructive, most hating in our natures, and wears its putrid, brain-dead bigotry, racism, xenophobia, and misogyny as a badge of honor. And yet at the same time, these people are so hopelessly lame that they can't even come up with a new original name to describe themselves. Now that's sad. But what is even sadder, and in this case sad is being used in a sense of deeply distressing, is the utter failure of our media to take such as terrorist Bryce Quiller and his cohorts seriously, or to consider the danger they represent, or even to discuss them, except, you will note, when the subject is raised by someone among the powerful, such as Hillary Clinton. Because unless it's raised by someone among the powerful, it's not on the agenda. And if it's not on the agenda, it doesn't get attention from the mass media, leaving us uninformed, malinformed, and misinformed, and that is a disgrace and a threat to our democracy. All right, I got 2 minutes left, I've just been told, so I'm going to squeeze this in. A quick example of one of our features is called And Another Thing, where we just have some cool science stuff. And the deal here is, according to a new study, yes, your dog really does understand you. Not only do dogs understand the meaning of words and the intonation, but they use the same parts of their brain to process language that you do. And I have to tell you, I knew this a long time ago. I had a dog, her name was Penny, smartest dog I ever personally have known. Got to the point where, yeah, she understood the words. She understood the word outside so well that you could not even use the word casually in the middle of a sentence in conversation without her running to the back door to get into the yard. One time I decided to test this, and our term for treats for the pets was goodie. And so one time I was up and I brought over, okay, Penny, do you want a read zap? And she's kind of like, Penny, do you want a hard sober? Hey. All right, how about a goodie? Bark, 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 bark. Yeah, she knew the word, not just the intonation, not just the tone of voice. She knew the word goodie. So I've known this for a long time, but it's nice, the new information that says they actually even process it in their brains the same way that we do. We're more alike than we even thought. All right, that's it for this week. I'm out of here. You have the best week you possibly can, and we will see you next week. And until then, as always, I wish you peace.